Dear friends, welcome to Spacefaring Civilization, or SFC for short, as we'd love to call it. Hi, I'm Masood, and today we're going to be talking about how to incorporate art of science in your science fiction films or optimistic science fiction films. But before that, what is Spacefaring Civilization all about? If you're new here, Spacefaring Civilization is basically us filmmakers working together and helping each other to support and create optimistic science fiction. So why art of science? So art of science is a term that I've come up with to describe the way that we interpret raw data. So science is mainly based upon or revolves around evidence, or what's commonly known as raw data. So we need to interpret that raw data to make that mean something to us. And that's where the art side of it comes in. So that's the creative side of our brain working in line with our logical side of our brain to make sense of what's happening in real life. So an example of what's happening right now with COVID-19, so there are modeling that takes place to see where the virus will be or how the infections progress within a nation or a country. So that's scientists taking a systematic stepped approach to come up with a model that's as realistic as they can make it. That's where the art of science comes in. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future. There are things that we can predict and theorize. And this is where we can base our science fiction films on, based on the theories and the predictions that we make, that where we're going to be as a society in the future, both from a scientific realm as well as a society realm. So we need to portray these scientific ideas in our films in an interesting way, in a dramatic way. So we're storytellers. We're obviously dealing with human emotions, but at the same time, we need to use our imagination and scientific realities to make a plausible story, something that we can believe and something that can inspire us to actually take action. So for example, people who watch Star Trek were the engineers and scientists who got inspired. So our imagination takes us from just conveying the scientific data or scientific theories into a interesting and an engaging story. So these scientific concepts and scientific theories have been conveyed in different ways in science fiction. One is the realistic science, like Contagion. So Contagion is one of the films that basically portrayed the way that virus spreads throughout our planet and the way that scientists work through solving the pandemic. So you could say using real science into science fiction is basically the way of molding your story around something that we already know, a scientific theory, a scientific reality that we already know. So like the spread of virus, Contagion, but also The Martian, where scientists in NASA have already put in plans how to go to Mars and have a mission to Mars. And there have been documentaries about it and things like that. So Martian is based on real science, but it's something that hasn't happened yet. So something that is very, very much likely to happen in the future. Now, in contrast, extrapolation of scientific theories is something that we know that might happen according to a scientific theory, or if things continue the way they are, but it's something that can happen in the future. So it's very much plausible. So some of the examples that I can give are the space elevator, Arthur C. Clarke. Even though the science or the technology doesn't exist yet, the theories are very sound. And there are actually people researching, in reality, they're researching into space elevators, and they're making progress on how to make a big, long cable that can stretch all the way from the stratosphere to Earth, and then we can have, as it says, an elevator that goes up into the stratosphere and back down again on Earth. Another one is having a very large space station, big enough for people and community to work and live in. So that's like Babylon 5 with that big, wonderful station rotating around. Now, these are realistic scientific theories that have been researched, and there have been tests that have been done already on the Mir space station and also the International Space Stations. So these are things that are very likely to happen as well. Now, the final way that scientific theories and science concepts are portrayed in science fiction is via plot devices. So these are things that are more a little bit on the fantasy side, but they're still plausible. So they're not according to what we know currently in the scientific realms or scientific theories, but it could possibly happen. Not for a very, very long time, but there are evidence that some of these things, like transporting a photon from one place to another, that has already happened. So that can lead into transporting a whole object. Whether we can transport a human being, that's another story, and we don't know if that's actually is possible. Another thing is faster than light travel is another thing that was used as a plot device to get the story going. So having a ship travel from one solar system to another solar system with our current technology takes a very, very long time. So it could take generations after generations, and there are a lot of difficulties associated with that when telling that type of story. So some of the plot devices that was invented or imagined was faster than light. So according to the theory of relativity, we can never travel even close to the speed of light. But faster than light says, oh, okay, we can create an alternate warp environment that we can, overcome this limitation. So obviously these are very much on the, you could say, on the conceptual side. But as we know it in this current scientific knowledge that collectively that we have, it doesn't seem possible. But who knows what's going to happen. So these are the three methods in which you can incorporate science or the art of science into your films, into your scientific films. Just before I move on, with plot devices, sometimes plot devices are used in a story to overcome a particular storyline. But sometimes it's better to actually not use those plot devices. So I'll give you an example. In case of transporters in Star Trek, so that was to overcome basically a limitation of the filming techniques and visual effects at the time to get people from the starships to the planets. So that was an easy way of getting around that. But having actually shuttles, that actually creates more drama. It can be dramatic in your stories. It can be expensive, and I wouldn't recommend straight away, jumping onto that. But consider things like that you can use real science, or even a conceptual one, or extrapolate one from a scientific theory that can be plausible, that can be very engaging. Now I mention this because also we want to make our science fiction films educational. So in terms of Martians, there is a lot of things that we learned. One is that we can actually grow potatoes or plants in a Martian soil if we mix it up with an organic matter like our own poop. Yes, we can grow potatoes from our own poop. We have been doing it for decades and centuries and millennia on Earth, so it is absolutely possible. And there are researches that have been done at the International Space Station where we can grow plants from just nutrition water. So a nutrition that's injected into water, and you can actually grow plants in space. So that is very much plausible. So again, I mention this because sometimes it is better to not use a plot device and use a real science or extrapolate from a scientific theory that can be very inspirational, something that we can achieve. Now, for optimistic science fiction, obviously we can consider all of this. We can have one or more of this type of what I call art of science in our science fiction. So whether it's real science, extrapolate from a theory, or something that's not realistic but you can use as a plot device, but it's still plausible. You can use one or more of them, or you can focus on one. So for example, in my next film, I'm going to be looking at generation ship. So as I mentioned, traveling from one solar system to another takes a very, very long time. And there are several ways that we can achieve this travel, or at least the theories are. One is building a really big ship that people go on and they have kids, and generation after generation they travel to their destination. And they themselves, so the people who started wouldn't reach the destination, the target solar system and the planet, but their descendants will. So that's something that I'm going to explore, and that should be lots of fun. So ask the question, how does this scientific theory or concept that I'm portraying in my film help us create a better future? So that is some of the ways you can incorporate the art of science in your films. There are many, many other ways. Do your research. There are many resources. Some of them, I'll put the links in the description below. Thank you for joining me, and keep writing optimistic science fiction.